Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. In this video, we are going to discuss about the concept of C-value and C-value paradox. So before going on to this concept, I am going to tell you guys something which you already know. We already know that the number of the chromosomes in different species remains the same. Homo sapiens has the 46 chromosomes, Drosophila has 8, and Vana tigrina has 26 number of chromosomes. And exceptions are always there, but the number of the chromosomes remains the same in all the species. So now coming on to the C-value, it is said that the total DNA content or the amount of DNA in the species and all the individuals of that species is constant. Here's the definition. Each species has a characteristic content of DNA which is constant in all the individuals of that species. So this is the C-value. Now here's the concept. Lower eukaryotes have less DNA content. So lower eukaryotes are less complex in nature, so they have the less amount of DNA. And if we come towards the higher eukaryotes, higher species, they are more complex, so they have great DNA content as compared to the lower eukaryotes. Also the eukaryotes vary in the DNA content from each other, okay, and there's a great variation in the DNA content of prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Like prokaryotes are very less complex, they have the less DNA content, and eukaryotes are more complex, so they have more DNA content. Now make it more clear with the example. Here's an example of prokaryote, which is E. coli. So it is less complex, okay, and there's two eukaryotes, nematode and Drosophila, and DNA content of both of these species, like nematode and Drosophila, is compared with that of prokaryote. So nematode, which is more complex, and C. elegans, the example is of C. elegans, which is the species of the nematode. It is 20 times more in DNA content than that of the E. coli, and Drosophila's DNA content is 40 times more than that of the E. coli. So with this example, we can easily see that the eukaryotes have higher DNA complex than that of the prokaryote. The reason is this, because these are the more complex and this is the less complex. So more the complex species, more DNA content, and less complex species, less DNA content. So here's an experiment that not the proper experiment, but just an idea that how the experiments were made to calculate the DNA content. We know that DNA is present in the nuclei, all right. So what scientists did, they stained the nuclei in the DNA in the nuclei with some stains, and we know the Fulton stains and Fulton reaction. We have studied about them in previous classes. So after staining those DNA and nuclei in the cells, the amount of the stain in the nuclei was measured, okay. So with the amount of the stain, they could easily measure the total DNA content, like how much amount of DNA is stained, okay. So and this experiment was, or this DNA content was calculated through a special type of microscope, which is cytophotometer. And the results were like this, that the diploid cells and the haploid cells, they contain the same amount of DNA content from generation to generation. Diploid cells contain 2C, DNA content in the haploid genomes contain 1C, and some liver cells are polyploid, and their DNA content was 4C or 8C. These were the results. Now, okay, so what we said, that more the complexity in the species, more the DNA content, all right, but there were some confusions. Now here comes the concept of C-value paradox. What was seen that salamander, all of us know salamander, we have studied about it in previous semesters. It is an amphibian, and amphibian is the lower group as that of mammals. Man is mammal. So what scientists observed, that the DNA content of salamander was 84 picogram. Picogram is basically the unit in which the DNA content is measured. It was 84 picogram. And when the DNA content of man was measured, it was 3 picogram. Okay, so what we discussed above, we said that the more complex the species, the more DNA content, okay. And we know that man is the most complex species, all right. So how the DNA content can be 3 picogram, and how the DNA content of salamander can be 84 picogram, okay, because salamander is less complex. If we are comparing these both, salamander is less complex as compared to mammals, okay. So this is the C-value paradox, okay. This is the confusion or the complexity, that how is this possible, and why the C-value or the DNA content vary this much, like 84 and 3 picogram. All of us know that how proteins are formed. DNA plays very important role in formation of proteins, and the process of translation and transcription, we will discuss it in further videos. So what is written, that 3 million average size proteins in the man would be accommodated if all DNA was coding. What is the line saying, that if all the DNA in the man, if it is was coding, like DNA has some code, some genetic codes on it, which is translated and which helps in making of proteins. Okay, so if all the DNA, like all the 3 picogram of the DNA, if it is coding, then the 3 million average size proteins are present, and a man will have 3 million average size proteins. 3 picogram and 3 million average size proteins in case of man. And now if we talk about the salamanders, here is 84 picogram, means much higher DNA content than that of the man. So if all the DNA content in salamander is coding, then it would have 30 times more genes in salamander than that in man. Okay, now we are comparing the number of the genes of the prokaryotes and the eukaryote. Prokaryote is the E. coli and eukaryote is the man. So the genes in the E. coli are 3,000, and the rough estimate of the genes of the man, it is 20,000 to 30,000. So it is obvious that the less complex DNA content in the less complex species and more complex DNA content in the more complex species. So what is the reason behind the C-value paradox? It is said that the large amount of DNA is made up of repetitive sequences, means the nucleotide sequences in the DNA are being repeated again and again. Okay, so these sequences which are being repeated, they makes the DNA content much higher. Okay, so this is the reason that the salamander has much higher DNA content than that of the man. And it is said that 1 picogram of DNA is equivalent to 31 centimeter cube of DNA. So with this, the total DNA, like the length of the DNA in the human diploid cell, is calculated, which is 174 centimeter. So DNA content is proportional to the size of the chromosome. It means that if the chromosome size is larger, the larger amount of DNA can accommodate in it. Okay, and if the size of the chromosome is small, the amount of the DNA which will be accommodated in this chromosome will be less. So the largest chromosome is 10 micrometer long. It contains 7.2 centimeter of DNA. Okay, and the DNA is folded 7,000 times. Okay, it is in a very compact form in this chromosome. In the further topics, we will discuss about the coiling and folding of the DNA and various other topics. So this was all about C-value and the C-value paradox. If you have any questions, then feel free to ask in the comment box, and do like this video, and Allah Hafiz.